Let's launch this by dealing with the whole question of what a green career is or what a green job is. In defining it, I'm looking at the way the U.S. Department of Labor defines it. And it's interesting to look at this definition, to take this apart and look at it a couple of ways. One thing you have to realize, notice that jobs and businesses that produce goods or services that benefit the environment and so forth, this is about the particular business that you work for. It's not about your occupational title. It's not about your job title. It's not about where you went to school. It's not about even the tasks that you're doing. It's the business itself and what it's doing. So, for example, you could be a petroleum engineer who specializes in drilling, and you could be doing that for BP and not be at all green, or you could be doing that for a geothermal company that's taking heat from the earth and supervising the drilling to reach those hot rocks down there, and you will be doing something that's green. So it's interesting to look at it this way. It can be defined in terms of where you're working, the particular office you're working in, or work site you're working in. Or at the other half of the definition at the bottom of the screen, jobs in which workers' duties involve making the establishment's production processes more environmentally friendly, etc. Here it's more a question of the duties, and it's something that would probably transfer from one employer to another. So if we talk, for example, somebody who installs solar panels, this is one of the stereotyped green jobs. You can't do that in a non-green way. Whatever you're doing as a solar panel installer, you're doing this in a way that helps conserve resources. It works both ways, both in terms of the jobs and in terms of the occupation. Now, at JIST, we sometimes use the word jobs and occupations interchangeably, but job is a particular opening at a particular place with a particular worker, whereas an occupation is something where a bunch of workers have something in common, usually the work tasks and the requirements for career entry. So we can look at it both ways when we're looking at green careers. And here's another way to look at green careers. And again, this is following the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Labor, who have analyzed this quite thoroughly. They look at three kinds. One kind is those occupations where there's increased demand because of green concerns. These occupations will take on many new workers because of the green practice and technologies that are coming online. And here's some examples of these. And as we'll see later on in this includes a wide variety of different levels of skill and education. And many of these, this will have opportunities for people at many different levels. Another kind, it's not so much that the demand is increased, but what makes it particularly green is that the skills are different. So, for example, there's an existing job where, for example, automotive specialty technicians, where they used to maybe do tune-ups of gas-powered engines, now they're doing tune-ups of electric engines. And so they need new skills in order to do that. The pipe fitters and steam fitters might have been fitting things for a traditional heating system, or they may be fitting pipes for an ethanol plant. So these skills will need to be different in order to do these jobs in a green way. Urban and regional planners may have to deal with energy issues where previously they'd dealt more with aesthetic issues or slum clearance and things like that. Now, a third kind is new and emerging occupations that are considered green, and here are some examples of these. Some of these you may not have even heard of before. Others may be more familiar to you, but these are being created because there's a need for these. For example, there's a need for brownfield redevelopment specialists. So the third kind, which is these new and emerging occupations, and some of these are the most interesting ones, the ones that people think of first when they think of green jobs. For example, the solar photovoltaic installers, the wind energy operations managers. But unfortunately, these are the ones about which there's the least amount of information currently available. The Department of Labor hasn't done salary surveys for them, for example. But there's a lot that can be learned about them anyway in terms of what the work tasks are. Now, let's look back at these and see, what does this say about the green careers then? Well, two of the three kinds of green workers will be in existing occupations. Many people, when they think of green careers, they think it's something entirely new, and they think it's only the last kind, the new and emerging occupations. But, for example, the plumbers and the pipe fitters or the automotive service technicians, these are careers that already exist. They're job titles and so forth that already exist. They'll need new skills or there'll be new demand for them. But then there will be, as I said, the three kinds of green workers need new skills. They need to be able to do things that previously they hadn't done in those traditional occupations. Now, what that means, therefore, is people are going to have to be trained. So educational institutions have to come up with the appropriate education or training programs. That might be an apprenticeship. It might be a college major with a focus on green issues. Another thing that often happens is with a lot of careers is certification becomes an issue, particularly when there's sort of public health and welfare involved in it. So we can't have pipes that explode or solar panels that collapse, that cause the roof to collapse and so forth. And so these certification standards have to be worked out. There's one called LEED, Leadership in Efficiency and Environmental Design, I think is what that stands for, LEED, which is something by which buildings get certified as meeting these requirements as being energy efficient. And the people who do them also have to be certified that they know how to do that kind of design. And then there's compensation. If people are using new skills or doing new tasks, they shouldn't be paid the same as the traditional workers. Usually they're going to earn more. And that also has to be worked out. Things are being worked out by employers, and we're going to see these effects over time. So now let's look at some of the major industries that are employing green workers. Actually, the first industry we're going to look at is renewable energy generation. This includes generation from solar and wind and geothermal and so forth. This is probably the one that people think of first when they think of green careers. And obviously energy is something that many scientific advances and engineering advances are being made that are creating new careers. You may not be familiar, for example, with geothermal heat as a source of energy, and you may think it only happens in places where they have natural geysers and so forth, like you're seeing in the illustration here, but it has uses in many different kinds of places. We'll see an illustration of that a little later. Transportation is another industry that's going to use a lot of green technologies. One of the things that sometimes comes up is the issue of whether traditional transportation careers can be considered green careers. Take, for example, a bus driver. As we move into more of a green economy, we'll probably see more people taking the bus. That will be encouraged, and it does result in energy conservation, energy savings when people can take the bus. However, the bus driver, him or herself, is just doing the same thing that bus drivers have been doing now for 50, 60 or longer years, and it's not essentially different. The skills aren't different, and the work tasks aren't different, and so it would be hard to consider that a green career. But there are careers where the skills are different because of the need for green practices. So, for example, logistics careers, ways to move goods and services more efficiently, are becoming more popular because of the demand for energy conservation and just because it saves money. And by the way, this is one of the things that everyone has to recognize, that no matter where you stand politically and what you think about global warming and so forth, using energy and other resources more efficiently is simply a money saver. And some of the businesses that don't take a political stand in particular, nonetheless have found that in there are great cost savings to be realized from using green practices. And energy efficiency is another industry where there are a lot of green practices. The smart grid is some of you may have heard of, where, for example, your washing machine can communicate with the grid and turn itself on in the middle of the night when the power demand is less, and power can be priced accordingly so that pay less. Geothermal heat pumps are an interesting technology. As I said earlier, you may think of geothermal heat as just something that you'd have to dig way down to volcanic rock to get, but actually just a few feet under the ground there's a consistent temperature, and the kind of heat pumps that people use to draw heat out of the air can be used instead to draw it out of a loop of water that circulates in the ground. There are jobs that involve just digging those ditches to put in the coils of pipe, or servicing the heat pump. So there are many traditional careers that are getting changed around by the need for energy conservation, and then also to recycle waste heat. There are lots of industries that give off a lot of heat, and now they're finding ways to use it. Construction, this is a very important industry, and currently it's really hurting because of the collapse of the housing bubble, but there are going to be green opportunities there. There will be codes that are changed that make it more advantageous to conserve energy. There will be people who will be retrofitting the existing structures, for example, taking insulation and making them more heat efficient. There's recycling of structures is another thing. Something that used to be a warehouse now could be turned into a bunch of condos. Builders are finding ways to recycle materials or use organic materials. They're even making houses out of straw. In spite of that story about the three little pigs, it can be a very good building material if it's used right. Construction can work in a way that allows for passive solar heat or light. Every Walmart that's built in California these days is being made with a white roof, and that doesn't soak up as much heat as the traditional black roofs that you've seen on so many buildings. Green roof is one like the one in the illustration here. It's not colored green. It's got a lot of plantings on it. You could say it's a combination of architecture and agriculture. That's an important industry. Energy trading is something where there'll be a lot of careers for people who have an interest in business. And they may wonder, well, I'm not interested in science, I'm not interested in agriculture, I'm not interested in construction. What can I do in a business way that will be a green career? Well, there are careers where you're trading energy as an economic commodity. You may remember Enron. This was a company that was created entirely for the purpose of trading energy. They didn't create any energy at all, they just traded it, and the idea was to distribute it to markets efficiently. Now, of course, you remember that whole thing collapsed. It was a big, a lot of hanky-panky going on in that company. This is something that often happens in new industries. They're not regulated. They're not looked at very much. People don't understand them, and so some shady operators can abuse them. But this is something that is going to be more and more important over time as people discover that there are more efficient ways to use energy by trading it just as any commodity. The efficiency improves when there's a market for it and it gets traded openly. Carbon trading is another thing. You may have heard of cap and trade. This is the idea that companies get a certain ability to release a certain amount of carbon to the atmosphere, and then they can trade. If they don't use all that, if they can conserve carbon and not put out a lot of carbon dioxide, they can trade that right away to someone else. This has worked very efficiently for power plant emissions. You hardly ever hear anybody talk about acid rain these days because that was imposed for power plant emissions and worked very well. But currently, for carbon trading, the political climate doesn't seem very good. It will take probably a political change if that's going to catch on. One thing that is being proposed for carbon is the idea of sequestration, which means that you liquefy it and pump it into the ground. Still a pretty experimental technology. There are also experimental technologies that recycle carbon and turn it into new fuels. Another thing to do with energy is to store it in batteries. And the idea is that when you have a certain time when there's peak demand, when you really need the power, and then there's other times when you don't need so much power and you want to find ways to store this. A lot of what they do now is when the peak demand is going on, you bring in the power from the next time zone over where they're not at peak demand. But in some places, like particularly Hawaii, that doesn't work so well. You don't have that opportunity. And so there are new technologies being worked out to store this in batteries. Another thing is to store it in reservoirs, as in the illustration here. You pump it uphill from a river or a lake. You pump it uphill when power is plentiful, and then when power is peak demand, you let it flow downhill through a turbine. Although in the end, it's less efficient than just using it all along. It spaces out the demand. It makes the supply of energy match the demand better. You may have noticed that I've talked a lot about new technologies that are being developed. Somebody has to do that. Somebody has to develop this. Someone has to do the R&D. Someone has to develop the buildings that incorporate these new designs. Someone has to engineer the particular public works, the buildings, the highways, and so forth, the dams and geothermal installations. And somebody has to plan for the cities to make them more efficient. And then finally, somebody has to train these new workers to be able to hold these new occupations and do these tasks in a greener way. So this creates a lot of jobs for people who have scientific interests, who have teaching interests, social science interests. So you can see green careers are a lot more than just things where for example, you're a mechanic working on a solar panel or or someone installing insulation. Now, environmental protection involves a lot of different kinds of skills. There are people who do environmental remediation, cleaning up Superfund sites, for example. Near where I live, there's a place where there used to be a GM plant, and it's shut down. And it seems like a lot of the plants that have shut down, they're located in some very good real estate. You know, they're located in a city or near the city. They're located near a railroad or a highway. Excellent places for new businesses, for new homes, but there's often a legacy of toxins that have to be cleaned up. And we need workers to do that and workers to manage that whole effort. Climate change seems like it's coming on us. We need scientists, and we also need architects and other designers, engineers to deal with some of the effects of climate change. And this will have an impact on water and air, and we need workers to deal with that also. Then there's agriculture and forestry. Now, we've had these occupations now for thousands of years, really. We've had farming going on. To some extent, it's just like the bus drivers. If they're doing the same old thing they've always been doing, it's not really something you might consider a green career as such. But as it happens, in response to the concern about the environment and concern for energy efficiency and recycling, there are changes in the way that agriculture is being done. So, for example, the use of natural pesticides or predators like this ladybug, more efficient land management, and some of this can be done with things like GPS and satellite imagery. It's amazing what new things are being done in that ancient craft of farming. Aquaculture, and nowadays almost all the salmon you buy is fish farmed. So these are some green careers that are coming about for people who are interested in agriculture. People say that manufacturing in the United States is dead, but it's not really. It's become leaner and meaner. It's become more efficient, and one of the things that can save it, if we have the right industrial policy, is to focus on manufacturing green materials and green products. And so I mentioned the use of straw for building, for example, and energy generation. And so, for example, here's a picture of a wind turbine blade. When you see it up on the pole there, it's hard to realize how big these things are. But you can see this thing's the size of an airplane wing. They're enormous. And for that reason, it's not very efficient to make them over in some foreign country and ship them over here. It's more efficient to make them here. And that's one reason why the shift to green manufacturing can produce jobs here that can't be shipped overseas. Now, currently, your electric cars, a lot of them are being pioneered overseas, but we may see more of that going on here. And that's just one example of many kinds of manufacturing industries that may spring up here. And then there's just the idea of taking existing manufacturing processes and finding ways to make them more efficient. I mentioned heat recycling earlier. There are ways to reuse materials make them more efficient, or substitute materials. And so manufacturing will use many different kinds of people. Now, some of these are people who have specific skills where they're right out there on the shop floor. They might be machinists. They might be people who repair industrial equipment, but some of them are also engineers and designers who work out the different ways to manufacture things more efficiently. Recycling is an important part of green practices, the idea of reusing materials rather than reusing new materials. And some of this is just figuring out what to do with all of the garbage that we generate in our economy. And wastewater is another one. There are ways to process recyclable materials that people are working out. One thing you may not be aware of is the fact that landfills are constantly giving off gas. If you ever go to somewhere with a landfill, you may see these little chimneys sticking out of them, and that's currently used to vent off this gas. Actually, it's a gas, methane, that produces a lot of global warming, and so it's a waste to just let this go and not use it. So in some places they flare it off, they burn it up, but in other places they're actually finding ways to collect it and purify it and generate power from it, or just pipe it into people's homes to use as natural gas. Government has a role in all of this. A lot of environmental concerns are things that don't exist in any one place. It's not just any one person's tailpipe or one person's chimney. A lot of these are nationwide issues that government plays a role in, and so conservation and pollution prevention are things that government gets involved with. There are people who work to enforce regulations. Often you go into a kind of job like this after you have some experience in the industry and you understand it, and then you can become a regulator. So you might be a building inspector. And then there are people who are advocates for new policies, and it's something that's advancing and changing all the time. Let's look at some green careers that require less than a bachelor's degree, because I really want to dispel the notion that green careers require just one kind of educational level. Biofuels production technicians. This currently has a pretty good political outlook. There are a lot of farm states that have a lot of political clout, and they manage to get funding that subsidizes ethanol production or biodiesel. I know someone who works at an Exxon lab near here in New Jersey, and they're very busy working out ways to try to create fuels from algae. So it's not just corn anymore. These are careers you can get into with just some post-secondary classes or training, such as an apprenticeship or on-the-job training. Military training is growing as a source of this interest. The military is looking at the idea of generating their own fuel rather than having it trucked across combat zones. You can imagine that a truck full of gasoline or diesel fuel is sort of a sitting duck when it's winding its way up the valley in Afghanistan. The estimates for who's doing this are based on industry estimates. The Department of Labor has only started to collect information on this and hasn't published information on how many people are going to be working in this. So these estimates I have, the first two bulleted estimates there are industry estimates. And I have to admit, industries tend to be boosters of what they're doing, and so these might be exaggerated somewhat. The last estimate there is based on plant and system operators, all other. So it's sort of a catch-all for the ones who aren't doing, for example, petroleum plant operation, and those who are working in the basic chemical manufacturing industry. Now, this will include some people who aren't working in anything that has to do with biofuels. So the estimates are only rough at this point. In a couple of years, the Department of Labor will start publishing estimates for some of these emerging green careers. Energy auditing is an interesting career that you may have heard of before or may not have even heard of. And it happens at several different levels. You'll notice I mentioned a 2-year degree or construction experience background that you could get to learn the skills. But you could also get a bachelor's in mechanical engineering or energy engineering as a preparation for this. And the level of skill you bring to this will probably have a lot of effect on the level of pay that you get from this. The Association of Energy Engineers really expects there's going to be a shortage of workers to do this. And by the way, I should point out, in the illustration here, you'll see someone crouched by a fan. To put a door into your house, and there's a fan in it, and that sucks air out of the house, And then it's easier to detect where there are air leaks of air coming into the house if you depressurize the house in that way. And just measuring the difference in air pressure inside the house and outside of the house will give you an idea of how airtight that house is. So this is something that residential or commercial buildings, this is done for those kinds of settings. But a whole other thing that energy auditors do is to audit industrial processes. You know, if you think of what financial auditors do, they look at where the money is coming in from and where it's going, and they try to see if someone's stealing or somebody's using it inefficiently. Energy auditors in an industrial setting will be looking at where the energy is coming in from and where it's going and whether it's leaking out or whether it's being used inefficiently. So that's why the term auditor really makes sense for them. The stimulus plan included funding for weatherizing low-income houses, and part of that was expected to boost the number of energy auditors working from 1,000 to 3,000. My understanding is that a lot of that money actually has not yet been expended because this is a fairly new technology or new concern. There aren't a lot of people trained yet in this, and so it's only now that some of this money is starting to be spent. The American Solar Energy Society estimate here is probably based more on people with engineering experience, people with an engineering degree. This is the high end. Obviously, if you're someone who comes out of one of the lower skill backgrounds, you probably wouldn't earn that much. But it's a fairly new career, and it's going to be a question of what your skills are that will determine your pay. There are a few states and municipalities where there's licensure requirements, but this is going to vary a great deal. And this is something I could mention in general for some of these new and emerging occupations. There's a certain amount of fluidity or flux going on now in the licensing or certification requirements. In your area, if you're looking for your clients, what opportunities are there for them, you should investigate what the local requirements are because they vary a great deal right now. Now, this is probably the career solar photovoltaic installers that probably everyone first thinks of when you think of a green career. These are the people you see up on the rooftop there or on a ground-mounted installation setting this thing up. And this is something you can, again, do without a bachelor's degree. You can train for this specifically, or you can do this as an offshoot of an electrician apprenticeship. Military training, again, is becoming an option for this. As I said earlier, the Army uses a lot of generators, and if you're in the middle of the battlefield somewhere, it's nice if you can generate the electricity on the spot. Wind technology, by the way, is not much of an option for the military because the best place for a wind is up on a hilltop, and it's probably the worst place to locate a military installation. This is, again, an industry estimate here of the amount of growth, and so that may be a little exaggerated, and a lot of this is going to be a question of political will. From one state to another, there are differences in how much the state encourages solar installations by giving subsidies and tax rebates and so forth. BLS actually has given some estimates of the earnings here. I think we'll see better estimates in the coming year or two. Geothermal technicians, I mentioned earlier that these aren't just the people who are drilling in the lava beds or in places out in the west. Some of these are people who are dealing with digging ditches and laying pipes in them or drilling traditional wells like the one in my backyard, only instead of using them just for water for drinking, they're using them to circulate water that a heat pump can extract heat from. Again, like some of the previous ones we've seen, there are training programs in post-secondary institutions, and there are on-the-job training programs. Here are some industry estimates for geothermal heat pumps. And it's pretty impressive. Again, this is something you might go into by getting an HVAC apprenticeship or a two-year program in that field if it offers some particular training for this kind of installation. And there are jobs in this just for people simply who operate the ditch digging equipment. So there's a whole range of skills there that involve in that technology. Wind turbine. This is an interesting thing. Maybe if you have a client who likes to do rock climbing, the person obviously doesn't have a fear of heights, and the person obviously has some skills working in some of these settings. They used to find work fixing, like a clock up on a tower or some other kind of architectural feature on a steeple somewhere. Now they could be up on top of a wind turbine blade with a sanding kit and epoxy and so forth to try to repair these things. A lot of these blades are not made out of metal. They're made out of composites, high-tech materials, and we need specialized people who are trained to service these. Then again, inside the housing of where it's called the nacelle, where the power plant is that generates the power from these turning blades, there's a whole other set of work tasks that need to be accomplished because there are a lot of moving parts in there, and so we need people who are able to service those. To do that, you don't want a fear of heights. You don't want a fear of confined spaces. and you want, obviously, a lot of mechanical aptitude. A lot of the training beyond the basics will be machine-specific training from the manufacturer, because each one is made a little different. BLS has evidence of, it's anecdotal evidence about entry-level technicians, about what they're earning. BLS just recently published a little booklet, it's a PDF you can download from the Occupational Outlook Handbook site on the web that's specifically about wind turbine jobs. So now let's turn the page and look at some green careers that require a bachelor's degree or higher. As I said, these careers span a whole different set of skill levels. Construction managers are needed because, as I said earlier, there are green kinds of construction. Some of this is making things more energy efficient. Some of them involve using solar heat, passive solar heat, or green roofs and white roofs, as I mentioned earlier. And you need special skills to be able to do this. And many of these construction managers can get a degree in construction management or building technology or civil engineering or civil engineering technology. Some of them do it simply from work experience in a construction trade. They're blue-collar workers who probably through on-the-job training or maybe through a certain amount of classroom training take on managerial tasks and learn managerial skills. But again, there are some excellent degree programs in construction management. It can be a very good route for getting into this. Architects, they're finding out new ways to design buildings that are greener. And this is a career that's been around for a long time. A bachelor's degree is a minimum. Some people get a master's degree in this. You do need to be licensed, and usually you have to work for several years for an architecture firm after you get your degree before you get your licensure. It's got a fair amount of growth here. Right now, of course, while there's not a lot of building going on, it's not prospering so much, but in the long run, it's got a good projection for growth. And for those who understand green architecture and are trained in that, the opportunities, I think, are going to be better than what's indicated here in terms of the growth. Commercial and industrial designers, some of these people actually go into this with less than a bachelor's degree, but for the most part, that is what's expected. And everything we use, everything that's around us has been designed by commercial and industrial designers. To give you an example of something you might think of, something like the iPad is an example of really good industrial design, where they come up with something that just feels right, that works right, that has that kind of appeal, that's a cool design. And people who have an artistic ability and also maybe some mechanical ability or ability to work with things might consider a career with this. And one of the things that you'll be doing is figuring out ways to use more efficiently to make products that use resources less or that cause some other kind of savings of resources. The growth of this is not as good as some of the occupations looked at before, but it's interesting to note how many of them are self-employed. Many people set up their own industrial design firm and design products. Here's some examples of educational training programs for green careers that I found from online web catalogs of various educational institutions. And this is a certification program from a technical college for a photovoltaics installer. And as you'd expect with a certification program, it's going to be focused very much on the practical concerns of what you're doing. Not so much on theory, but based on the particular things you're going to be doing on the job. But there is something called Tools for Success that deals with sort of general issues for how to be a good employee. Here's one for an energy auditing technician. I mentioned energy auditors might come in at the bachelor's level, or they might come in at a technician level. And here's one, this again, a certification program from a community college. There's a certain amount of theory there, technical math, but some of these are specific how-to kinds of courses, practical ones such as the residential HVAC systems or the residential energy ordering applications. And these applications are, for example, computer applications that would be things for calculating the energy usage of a building or an industrial process. Here's an AAS program, and this is being a 2-year program is going to be more complicated. It's going to involve more theoretical, things like Intro to Energy Management or Introduction to Architectural Drawing. These are more theoretical courses that give you a basis to learn about some of these specific, more job-related things. There's Intro to Writing. This is an associate degree, and so there's going to be more area requirements such as writing or a science course than you'd find in a certification program. You know, this something called energy accounting. I earlier talked about how energy auditors are in many ways the counterpart of a financial auditor, and so they even call this course energy accounting. Here's a certification program for geothermal technicians. Air conditioning 1 and air conditioning 2 have been around for decades now, but you can work that into this curriculum because geothermal systems use air conditioners and heat pumps, And so these courses are being adapted to serve these new green occupations. Here's one for wind energy and turbine technology. Again, it's an associate's program, so again, it's got more things like intermediate algebra. It's got more of the theory and business communications and those kinds of requirements, in addition to the ones that are particular to the work tasks of the particular occupation. This is something that you tack on to a bachelor's program. You may have a bachelor's in some field, such as construction management or energy engineering, and with this additional certification, you can understand how to manage a project that is energy efficient, that might get LEED certification. Here, again, this is something that as part of a bachelor's program, you would study engineering efficiency and energy conservation and be able to get this certification as part of your bachelor's program. Now, some people may retool themselves. They may get a master's degree. They may have a bachelor's in some other field and go back to school. And notice that this has a couple of different options here. It's got a solar option and a nuclear option. Some people, by the way, wonder whether nuclear can be considered a green careers that deal with nuclear energy. Because I guess, strictly speaking, most nuclear energy is not renewable as such. You take the uranium out of the ground and you use it one time. But there are ways to reuse some of this green plutonium, for example. It's often regarded as green because there's no greenhouse gases involved in the production of power, unlike with burning oil or coal. This is a good site that you might turn to find out more about green educational and training programs. It's part of the Department of Energy. You see, it's part of energy.gov. And there's information there about many different green programs at very many different institutions. And you can perhaps find one for your clients in your area. Some people want to deal with the issue of just finding a green job, just finding green job openings. I could recommend very heartily a website called Green Collar Blog. It's www.greencollarblog.org. And this is maintained by a friend of mine, Leonard Adler. We're going to be presenting this summer at the National Career Development Association about green jobs. And he has information there about using job boards, about the hidden green job market, and about future green jobs. And when I say future green jobs, it's the idea of looking out for job openings by, for example, looking at where money is being invested in green energy, or where laws are changing with regard to green energy, greencollarblog.org. So again, for just the question of job hunting, if people are looking for immediate job openings or want an idea for the long term for how they might look for jobs in the future, this is a very good source to be looking at. Here's some information about me and how to get in touch with me, my email address, my website address. One other thing I should mention, I have a Twitter feed. It's my name, Lawrence Shatkin, without a space between the two. That's my Twitter handle. And I won't flood you with tweets. I post about, let's say, roughly 3 tweets a day. That's about it. I also have a blog about careers in general, not just about green careers, but about careers in general, called Career Laboratory. And I post there about once a week, and I always alert people to my new postings through the Twitter feed. So if you follow my Twitter feed, you'll learn about any postings I put there. I also have one more thing. I got a fan page on Facebook, Lawrence Shatkin Career Information Author. So those are all ways you can learn what I'm up to, what I'm writing about, and what I'm thinking about currently, and what's going on with the economy and with careers. Now, here are some particular books and video about green careers. We have a 4-book series just turned out about progressive careers, is what this 4-book series is called. One of the volumes is about green careers. Quick Green Jobs Guide is something that's sold in packs of 10, so there's small little booklets, and it's very easy to hand them out at workshops and so forth to people who are interested in this. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is published by the federal government, but the most recent edition of it didn't have information about these new emerging green careers. So we, in our own version of the Occupational Outlook Handbook, we tacked on a chapter that I wrote where I researched this whole issue with what information was available at that time, emerging careers such as the geothermal technicians, the solar technicians, the biofuels technicians, the energy auditors. Those are some that we put in there. You can get the OOH on the web, but this green content that we developed for JIST is available only in this printed copy that JIST publishes. And then there's the video, and I understand everyone who is a participant in this workshop today gets a certain amount of a price reduction on this. I guess I've reached the end of what I want to say about these careers, and I'd like to hear questions that all of you have.